Hi, Stars fans. Nicholas Petroni, Stevens Sports Information Director, coming to you on the third edition of Speaking with Stars. Today, I'm talking to George Young, KFRU and KLIK Sports Director and host of The Closers, weeknights from 4 to 6 p.m. on 98.9 FM, 1400 AM, 103.5 FM, and 1240 AM. George, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well. Nick. Thanks for the invitation. I hope everything is going well with you and yours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I like to ask everyone, how's your family doing? How's everyone doing at home? Everyone staying safe and at the station?
Yeah, everybody is doing fine. So we've checked in actually last night. So everybody's doing well.
With sports having been on hiatus since mid-March, how has that affected your daily routine and preparation for your show?
Well, we have a clause in our show liner, and it says sports and other stuff. And we've done a little bit of sports and a whole lot of the other stuff because of what's happened with the COVID-19. I mean, we've still covered Major League Baseball, what there has been of it, NFL with the draft, college sports because recruiting is still going on. But we've moved a lot into the other areas, the business side of things, how people are handling COVID-19. We do a segment once a month now with MU Healthcare, and they were really great to get started with it to get people familiar with COVID-19. So we're diving back into the medical thing. It's been a lot of other stuff. We started a book club every other week. Now we got a book club that we do a 10 or 12-minute segment on books because people are bored. You need something to do. We're trying to help with that out.
Have you found it hard in order to, think of ways to come up with creative content to fill during this time? I mean, you've obviously come up with some really good ideas. Was it hard to come up with them, or did it just come naturally?
It was a little bit of a challenge to begin with, Nick, because you're so used to doing the sports, and everything was revolved around what was going on in sports during that particular calendar, that season. And well, all of that has stopped, and you start looking at, okay, if everything is going to be stopping, what are some of the other areas of interest that I had or that my co-host Cam Connor has, and how can we create content based on those interests? And that was where the book club came in. That was where the business side of things comes in. He's a younger kid, so we're starting to do, we get in more of the esports stuff because it was still going on, and that's kind of his wheelhouse for that. I'm a little bit older than that. We've done some cooking segments, for crying out loud, just to try to fill the time, keep people engaged, and keep them going, hey, let's try this. This would be kind of cool to do. So there's a lot of stuff where neither one of us are familiar with it, but it gives us an opportunity to learn.
What segments have you found interesting to talk about that are new? As you alluded to, esports. Stevens had the first all-women's esports team in the country, started about 3 years ago. So with that being local and being so prominent, how has that filtered into your coverage, and what have you enjoyed talking about that's new to y'all?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been an interesting turn because you've got the esports out there with Stevens, with Columbia College, with the University of Missouri, and then you're also looking at now NASCAR joined right after their season was put on hiatus because they grabbed that iRacing platform and they've run with it for the last month and a half, albeit with a few hiccups along the way, but they've grabbed it and run with it. Major League Baseball tried to do something, but with the MLB The Game, and their problem was they never got out in front of it. They never got any notoriety or any notice going on that's happening. NBA with NBA 2K. Most people are familiar with the NBA 2K. They created teams and they ran it for 2 weeks. And all that did was that helped not just their brand and keeping them out in front of everything, Nick, but it also helped the esports because esports is sitting over there in the corner going, hey, we're here too. And we've been doing this a long time. And all of a sudden people started looking at that going, well, wait a minute, League of Legends, that's huge. And so I think esports ends up benefiting by what NASCAR and NBA has done and what Major League Baseball tried to do.
When new sports on the horizon, the NAIA just became the first governing body that said it's going to bring in women's flag football to be a championship sport starting in this spring, and then it becomes officially a championship sport in the spring of 2022. And it's an idea that's currently being talked about at Stevens. How do you think that's a sport that Stevens could, start and run with, especially with getting in on the ground floor and having somewhat of a level playing field with any school around the country, whether it's a D1 or D3, D2, or NAIA?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting in that they're doing it with the NAIA, and it's a partnership with the NFL, and the NFL is, at least for the first year, going to front some of the money, the startup costs to get that going, which, when I first saw that, I thought, wow, this is an interesting time to be approaching schools saying, hey, let's add a sport. When all these schools are going, okay, we got to cut this one, and we got to cut this, and we got to cut this, just because we are bleeding money like a stuck pig. And what's happened here, I think this gives women yet another opportunity to showcase their athletic ability. And there are a lot of opportunities out there, granted, but there are so many other opportunities that are available. And one of the things that you will constantly see, not as much now, but you still do see it quite a bit, is, well, yeah, that's great and all, but that's not a revenue generating sport. That's not a men's sport.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it going, well, I understand that, but we got to get in here on the ground floor. And I think the flag football is a good opportunity. It's amazing, Nick, to go back a couple of weeks ago when the WNBA draft took place, had its highest ratings it's ever had. And it took a huge push on the part of some of the women, whether it was Sabrina Ionescu or some of the other women that were prominent in that sport, to say, hey, why don't you put this on ESPN instead of shuffling it off to ESPN to see what it does? And then what was really interesting was the reaction 2 weeks later when the NFL draft happened, and you got all the men, Adam Schefter and all of them, saying, wow, the first live sporting event. And the women fired right back and said, excuse me, we had the WNBA draft a couple of weeks ago. Thanks for not paying attention to us again. And that was actually a great point to how, if you're so focused on the men's sport, you tend to ignore the women's sport, and they end up getting shuffled off over to the side.
What I find interesting, and where I think the adoption of flag football, if Stevens does end up taking it, is if you go back and look at the history of Stevens sports going back to the 70s and 80s, before the NCAA, I believe before NCAA, at least with Division I, starting around 1982, really took hold of the championships, Stevens was dominant and was competing on a national level, especially in golf and tennis, among some of its other sports. And again, was competing at the highest level, like Stephanie Powell Jackson, who's getting ready to go into the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame on May 20th, a former Stevens student. She turned down offers from UCLA, Mizzou, and I want to say Baylor possibly, but I think it was it was Tulsa. She turned down those schools to come play golf at Stevens, and she wasn't even on the top 6. She was playing as an individual as a freshman. Mm-hmm. Stevens sports at that time were so dominant, it would be like if they were competing today in the SEC, they'd be at the top of the conference. And they were able to stockpile talent that much. So when sports went away for a while, obviously when they were brought back around, I think 1994, it's harder to bring something back from scratch, as SMU learned, with its football team. And that was only a year, where they got the death penalty. So when you're bringing a sport back from scratch, when we came back, we weren't on the same level as what we had been in the 70s and early 80s. So when you're trying to essentially restart your entire athletics program and you're trying to get good in sports and competitive, it's to the advantage of a school like ours to jump on the flag football, because again, not everyone's doing it. It's not like Mizzou or someone else has had 100 years of history to build it up and have revenue. And oh, by the way, the NFL or another organization is willing to front money in order to help get it started. So that's something that could be competitive and work for our advantage. I mean, what are some of your thoughts on that? And how do you think that affects the coverage in local areas having to, another sport to pay attention to that could grow at the high school level, kind of like what hockey or bowling has in the last 20 years, or lacrosse in the same manner?
Yeah, and lacrosse was where I was going with that, because you had so many men's clubs with lacrosse, and then the women's clubs started getting in there on the high school level, and you see that graduating out into the collegiate level, different set of rules. And if you talk to the ladies about that, they're not all that thrilled with the fact that they got to play with a different set of rules than the guys do, but they're working with it. But to your point about where Stevens College was and where it is, I think there's probably no better example of what Title IX did across the sports world, making equal opportunities for those ladies who wanted to get scholarships at Baylor, at UCLA, at some of these other colleges and universities. Now they have that opportunity, where before you could stockpile your talent, as you had said. Now you don't necessarily have that opportunity because the other schools are out there cherry picking and offering scholarship opportunities. But the flag football, that's going to be an interesting one as far as coverage, because when's the season going to happen? When does it start? When does it end? What other seasons will it overlap with?